Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Mukhtar. Ustad, how are you?
Good, thank you very much. How are you doing? Nice to see you again.
I am good, alhamdulillah. It was very nice to see you again as well. It looks like you are on the other side of the pond today.
Yes, I am. Yes, I will be until the end of summer, till August. Inshallah, I'll be here for a while. So
Okay.
it works out good.
Well, thank you so much for making time again to join us. This is our third sitting, inshallah, and I got really positive responses to both our first two sittings, and there was a number of requests to discuss this concept of Wahdat al-Wujud, inshallah, that we will be delving into today. Mm-hmm. And your expertise is greatly appreciated, Doctor. But more than anything else, I think from my side, as well as the listeners from the last two sessions, we are just so humbled and impressed by your adab and your composure, mashallah, and may Allah preserve that in you, as well as your quest for knowledge. So we greatly appreciate your time and effort. And this topic, Wahdat al-Wujud, is obviously fairly complicated, and we will try to unpack it as much as possible. But before we start, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most beneficent and most merciful. Today we have assembled here in front of Dr. Ustad Mukhtar Ali to discuss this concept of Wahdat al-Wujud. Usually we don't have disclaimers before we start a session, but I just wanted to provide a very quick disclaimer here. Wahdat al-Wujud is a very complicated topic. Even for those of us who have tried to read about it or hear about it or discuss it, it's a very complicated topic, and it's a topic that has evoked negative reactions as well in the past, and it will continue to evoke negative reactions because of the nature of the subject. Allah warns us in the Quran against speculating about Him and His nature, and we are obviously going to be discussing matters of theology today, and may Allah forgive us if we say things or ask questions that are speculative in nature. The goal or the intention here is to have ma'rifatullah. So may Allah keep us on the straight path and forgive us if we speculate regarding Him during the course of the discussion. With that said, I just wanted to again welcome Ustad Dr. Mukhtar Ali, who is here with us. He's actually here joining us from London today. He's traveling. We've had two sittings in the past where we discussed various issues related to the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, but we never got to sort of the meat of the matter, perhaps, or the issue that perhaps the Sheikh himself didn't emphasize as much, but a lot of his maybe followers and subsequent critics emphasized on, which is this notion of Wahdat al-Wujud, the oneness of being, as it's called. And that is really the topic du jour. I wanted to, first of all, start with a quote from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who basically said, I'm paraphrasing and translating it. He said, the inability to perceive Him, which is God, is the beginning of perception. And this is the hadith that the Naqshbandis use as sort of a cornerstone. And this is really an acknowledgement that, ultimately we are all trying to learn and understand an entity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is beyond any of our perceptions or capabilities. So I just wanted to start with that. But because it's such a complicated topic, I wanted to perhaps give a quick roadmap for those of you who are listening and participating in terms of what are the types of questions we want to start with. We want to start with, first of all, a question about what does the word wujud even mean? What are some of the variations? Number two, we're going to be talking about one of the philosophical notions regarding wujud. So we will switch back and forth between irfani and philosophical questions here, because eventually they should both converge and merge regarding, is it mushtarak al-ma'nawi, for example. Then we will talk about this notion of tanzih and tasbih. and then get into some more issues regarding how the Shaykh himself talks about Wahdat al-Wujud, how have some of his students talked about Wahdat al-Wujud, and then some of the implications. So I'd like to start, Dr. Mukhtar Ali, with, first of all, this meaning, the meaning of the word wujud itself. Obviously, the word wujud comes from the triliteral root wajada, which literally means he found, or he's finding. And so within the word itself, there are these two meanings, one being being or existence, which is the concept of mawjud, and then the other being the concept of finding. And it seems to me when I read some of the secondary sources that the Sufis initially used wujud in the sense of finding, that they conceived of Allah as the one who is finding, who's to be found, whereas the philosophers started using wujud primarily from the perspective of it being a mafhum of being or existence. I just wanted you to perhaps unpack for us the word wujud itself and how you understand it in different contexts, inshallah.
Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So first of all, assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for having me on this third session. And hopefully we can unpack some of these topics in a fruitful way. So let's go and start at the beginning and sort of outline. I don't want to outline it historically, but at least conceptually, that we didn't have that major distinction between the Philosoph and the Arif in the early days of Islam. We had Muslims who were following the Prophet. They were Sahaba, and then they were companions who delved into hadith and then tafsir. And then slowly, as the Muslim world started to expand and different streams of knowledge came into the Islamic mindset, then we started using certain terms like the concept of wujud and so on. So initially, there wasn't this distinction, this clear-cut distinction between wujud as finding and wujud as being, this ontological and epistemological distinction. I mean, these things didn't really exist. So people were, using these terms in multiple ways, whether they were considered Sufis or philosophers or, people of the, theologians. All of this stuff was I don't want to say a later development, but it developed in stages. So in general, we can say that the Urafa, the Arif or the Sufi, and I'll use the word Arif. The Arif is the Gnostic, or the one who has intimate spiritual knowledge. Irfan it refers to gnosis. It's more than knowledge. It's more than a conceptual knowledge. And this is where we can say there's a distinction between, say, the mystic and the philosopher. The mystic claims irfan, claims spiritual knowledge through experience, experiential knowledge. And we have terms like this in the Quran and Hadith and the Sunnah and so on, which talk about kashf, mukashafat, mushahadat, shuhud, ma'rifa, and so on, as opposed to just ilm, which is just knowledge. So when we come to the idea of wujud is generally seen as existence, as we know it. Now, some of the Urafa, as well as those who are also inclined to philosophy, use the term to mean the existence of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have to be careful here, because sometimes it's being used to mean existence, what exists, and sometimes we refer to it as God Almighty. But when we refer to God Almighty, we can get into some problems. And this we will talk about in a moment when we talk about Wahdat al-Wujud, the concept of the oneness of being. Here we're referring to this idea of the origin of multiplicity from a unific source. If we speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in and of himself, then laysa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing like him. And so we cannot say he is a thing or he is like anything. So sometimes we run into problems when we describe Allah as Wujud. But at the same time, we cannot say that he's nothing. So I think it was Imam Sadiq or one of the early people of Ahl al-Bayt, where they said that, so they asked him, is God a thing? He says, Naam, Allah is a thing. Huwa shay. So he's something. But what that thing is, laysa kamithlihi shay. We cannot know that thing. So we distinguish between the essence of God, which is the unknowable essence, and multiplicity, or his wujud, his manifestations. And the only thing that we can know is him through his manifestations. We can never come to know the essence, bima huwa, essence, being qua being. So we distinguish between Allah and wujud from one perspective, and from another perspective, we see it as being all one thing. Why do we have the second perspective? Because as the Urafa, including Ibn Arabi and others, they say, Laysa fil wujud illa Allah. There is nothing in existence except God. So here God is being included in, or not included, but rather there is only one thing in existence, which is God. Yeah.
Thank you. I think maybe it was Abu Talib al-Makki, or I don't remember exactly which Sufi it was who first started coining this idea of la wujud illallah or la mawjud illallah. So the Sufis had this idea that from very early on that Allah is the real mawjud, he's the real wujud, and that we all have this fake wujud, which we'll come to inshallah. The second question, which is related to that, is when we take any sort of Islamic philosophy classes, one of the first lessons is, after we study the ghaya of falsafa, we go into, okay, what is wujud itself and what are the meanings of wujud? And the general accepted idea that wujud is on the one hand badihi, it's so innate, like we all feel our wujud, right? In fact, we cannot not feel our wujud. At the same time, there was some ikhtilaf about this core issue of is wujud mushtarak ma'nawi or mushtarak lafzi, as in when we say Zayd mawjud, Mukhtar mawjudun, Anan mawjudun, Allah mawjudun, do we mean the same thing when we predicate mawjud on a subject such as Zayd, who's a human being, or al-fars, or fars mawjudun, or jabal mawjudun, and then we say the same thing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And there was some ikhtilaf, and I think Mullah Sadra, who systematized the hikmat al-Muta'aliyah, he basically said, look, this is mushtarak manawi, and there were some discussions even amongst his disciples. But the Sufis, or perhaps Ibn Arabi, might argue that really to ascribe wujud in the same way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we would do to human beings or other things is a fundamental disconnect, that his wujud and our wujud are simply not the same. In fact, we don't even have wujud. Just wanted to quickly have your perspective on this idea of mushtarak manawi that the philosophers hold as sort of a foundation, because otherwise we couldn't proceed with falsafa. One way to think about it is perhaps that it applies in creation, that when we say a created thing exists, we mean the same thing. But then when we apply it to the unknowable entity, then it sort of it falls down. So
yeah,
comments on that.
See, here's the thing. This is a major problem with philosophy, is that the philosopher or the theologian is trying to place things in discrete categories. But the arif looks at things with holding contradictions as both being correct. So, for example, we can say that, yes, we use the term mawjud for Allah, and this is correct because it has one meaning, to exist, and it's badihi, it's self-evident. At the same time, we cannot say that the existence of God or God's essence is the same way that things and objects exist. His existence, dhatan, essentially is different. So from one perspective, yes, it makes sense to say that God exists and this table exists. But from another perspective, we can say, no, it's being used in a different way, because his existence is not like any other existence. Why? Because everything else is a dependent, is contingent. He's only the real existence. So just that alone shows that there's a different meaning of exist when we say, for example, the shadow exists. Does a shadow exist, or is it the absence of light? We see it as a shadow. So from one perspective, its existence is weak. And what actually exists is the person standing who's blocking the light. That's what exists. The shadow is the absence of light. And yet we say we can say that, yeah, there's a shadow there. We recognize its existence. And so this is an important point where Haydar Amuli and many others talk about, the existence of the world is like waves in the ocean. It doesn't have a real existence. The only thing that is real is the water. And then only these are forms that are produced. It's an illusory existence. So yeah, existence is a graded term. It's a graded reality, according to this philosophical term. Is wujud a graded reality? And this is also another topic we can get into. Is it something, is it graded? Yes, it is graded from one perspective. But when we apply it to Allah, then it's it's not graded, because it is only one existence, which is God's existence. So we're always dealing with these contradictions. We're always dealing with these contrary terms. And this is the nature of irfan, is that if you try to make things discrete into discrete categories, it's like physics, right? It's the further you go into quantum mechanics, the further you have to start thinking in relative terms. It's both, like what? Light is a particle and a wave. You just have to accept it like that. Right. So similarly, God is and he isn't, or things are and they're not. So the further, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you brought up a beautiful segue into sort of my next question and comment, which is, physicists for the longest time struggled with the quantum realm, right? Where they discovered things that, were both particle and wave, and like, wait a minute, is it a particle or is it a wave? It cannot be both at the same time. And, whilst the Quran talks about, his transcendence, his tanzih, as we call it, laysa kamithlihi shay'un, fasubhanahu amma yasifun, amma tushrikun, etc. But at the same time, we have his presence in our world, where says inna Allaha ma'ana, right? Allah says nahnu aqrab ilayhi min hablil warid, right? Aynama tawallaw fathamma wajhullah, etc. So the huwa al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin, right? So the Quran seems to offer us this kind of great mystery where really we shouldn't attempt to think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these kind of discrete terms, positive or negative. And one of the approaches, and of course I come from the Eastern tradition originally, and in the Eastern tradition, which was where logic was created with the idea that there is a greater being in mind, there were certain propositions where you wouldn't do tasdeeq as being false or true, whereas you would say this is a proposition that could be false or true. It could be both true and false. It could be neither true nor false. And in fact, Buddhist philosophers came up with a fifth category, which was this kind of ineffability, that there were certain propositions where you simply couldn't say anything in using words. And my sort of theory is that the Muslims, we inherited this great Greek tradition, where when we conquered Egypt, the Alexandrian school, which had been inspired by the School of Athens and the areas of Jundishapur and others, which were also filled with sort of Greek ideas, and that Greek logic allowed us to talk about certain things in in black or white terms. But then when the philosophers inherited theology, they sort of started to apply those same black or white terms for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas really there's kind of this great mystery, and Ibn Arabi talks about the cosmos is, he and not he at the same time, and that you couldn't. So just wanted your comments as to whether at some point we should, as to move forward the falsafa tradition, consider the possibility that maybe we should take into account certain types of paraconsistent logic, or a kind of tetralemma approach where false or true, law of excluded middle, law of contradiction shouldn't be applied at the level of the divinity.
Well, it's acknowledging the limitation of the intellect. It's acknowledging the limitation of logic. And I just want to bring back this one point that you said, that there's a fifth category, okay? And it's a small segue. It's a little diversion in our discussion. It's that generally speaking, in the world of fiqh, it is for the most part, most of the fuqaha believe that God's law at all times should be known. Can be known or should be known. But there is a possibility that God doesn't want certain things to be known, even with respect to sharia. So he hid them. Like, for example, the time of the Day of Judgment. He purposely hid that knowledge, and he didn't want anyone to know this, not even the Prophet. So it's also the case with respect to sharia, with respect to certain principles. And this is important. Why? Because we're coming into a time where there's quite a bit of distance between the age of sharia, the time of prophecy, and the time we live in now. The world has really changed, and it's changing rapidly, and it puts us into a difficult situation. And how do we live in these days? How do we apply Islam and the sharia today? So what we do is we go back to the fuqaha, to the jurist, and we try to ask, what is the hukum? What is the ruling of X, Y, and Z, of living in, say, in non-Muslim countries, or, paying tax to the US government, to wage war? There's a lot of major issues that Muslims face, contemporary issues. What do we do? Okay, I'm not going to answer those specifics, but just to think about that there's a fifth category of things which you cannot know, or you should not know, and God has hid them from you. Rahmatan, as a mercy to you. Some things have been hidden as a mercy. So anyway, just wanted to say that little bit, and we can return back to this bit on the limitations of logic, and how we conceive of God and Tawheed. This is ultimately a discussion of Tawheed. Wahdat al-Wujud is a discussion of Tawheed in philosophical terminology. Let me quote Dawood al-Qaysari. Okay, he says something very, very interesting here. So we talked about the oneness of being, that there's only one reality, which is the reality of God, and everything else is a shadow or whatnot. He says this is precisely the view of God's folk, Ahl-Allah, the people of Allah, since they hold that as being descends in the degrees of existence. So here we have a gradation. Being, wujud, descends in the degrees of existence. It becomes manifest in the enclosures of contingency. So being at the degree of the essence is non-manifest. But as it descends, it becomes manifest in the enclosures of contingency and the multiplicity of intermediaries. Its hiddenness intensifies. Its manifestation and perfections weaken. Pure being becomes a weaker manifestation of its essential self in the enclosures of contingency. This is the nature of life. Likewise, as its intermediaries decrease, its light is intensified. So now we're going upwards. its manifestation strengthened, and its perfections and attributes appear. Therefore, to apply being to a relatively strong manifestation is preferable to applying it to a relatively weak manifestation. So this is a matter of terminology, maybe adab you can say. So yes, all of it is being, all of it is wujud. But when we say wujud or al-haq ta'ala, that we're referring to God Almighty in his full manifestation, which is the essence, but which is non-manifest actually. So anyway, yeah.
This is, it brings up a number of things. You mentioned fiqh, and even in actually, just as a side, fiqh, we have these 5 categories, right? We don't have just haram and halal. We have makruh and so on and so forth. And then in the middle, you have this mubah category, which is like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean if it's mubah? It's allowed, but it really means that there's no reward or punishment for these actions. But that, so even within fiqh, we have these 5-fold categories. It's not black and white. But for some reason, from a logical sense, we only have 2. But the interesting thing that you just pointed out, which is when we think about these 2 words of wujud as being and wujud as finding, what we see is that material things are easily found. Anybody can see a rock or a mountain or the tree out there, but we cannot see immaterial things like our intellect, our qalb, the spiritual heart. These are not things we can see. So it almost seems like, on the one hand, as wujud, as being descends, wujud in terms of being discoverable reduces or increases, right? As in, the most material things are easily discoverable. The higher you are in wujud, the harder it is to find you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his inner secret, is essentially unknowable to anything but himself. So I always found that there was this kind of interesting tension between something that is in higher grade of being and discoverable, and but I wanted to kind of quickly touch upon, perhaps, Doctor, this idea that in Wahdat, maybe before we get into questions, I'd love for you to sort of quickly answer 2 basic questions that we all have. One is, it seems to me, based on secondary sources, that Ibn Arabi himself did not really articulate anything in terms of Wahdat al-Wujud. He never used those terms, and it was his followers, students who coined that kind of term. And then maybe comment on that, and then maybe just take a few minutes just to explain, at least from your perspective, what is Wahdat al-Wujud? And then we can kind of go into more questions, inshallah.
If you want to know the how to wrap your head around Wahdat al-Wujud, we have to look at a couple of very key terms. Now, maybe Ibn Arabi maybe didn't use that exact phrase, but the idea is all over the place in his writings, and that's all he talked about. He talked about the word tajalli. Tajalli is manifestation or theophany. So this is a very, very critical word to understand anything to do with Irfan, Ibn al-Arabi, all of his followers, even the early Sufis. The word tajalli is key, and it's also in the Quran. It's a word from the Quran. So when God manifested, self-disclosed, there was a theophany of the self on the mountain. Moses fell down in a swoon. He fainted. Okay, so this is the word that's being used in the Quran. And now what this means is that if we take this idea that there is only one thing in existence, which is God Almighty, and everything is a manifestation of that very one singular being, this is the meaning of Wahdat al-Wujud, is that it is all nothing but God Almighty. But is it God at the level of the essence? No, it's level of manifestation. So when we look at things and we are familiar with things, the reason why we are familiar with them is because our orientation is towards the external world. But if you ask the philosopher might not pay attention to children screaming on the street, someone talking to them, maybe because he or she is deep in thought. So this person who's meditating is in the world of intellect, or for example, someone who's praying, they're in the world of the qalb and spiritual, they're in the world of spirit, but they're not paying attention to the external world. So anyway, the point here is that it's a single reality and multiple of manifestation. This is the whole idea of Wahdat al-Wujud. And just like, for example, the human being, you're just one thing. The insan is simply one reality, except that you live in all these different realms. You live in the world of the spirit, and this is your spirit. You live in the world of the aql, and this is your intellect. The world of imagination, you occupy all of these different spaces. So you are a single graded being. You're one reality. So anything that happens on the level of the body is felt, and it reverberates and echoes in the levels of the heart, the soul, the imagination, all throughout the kingdom. It echoes. And this is why we have these acts of worship, physical prayer, physical fasting, these physical acts of worship, because those physical acts of worship have an echo, have a reality in the other realm. This is what Wahdat al-Wujud is. So that's all it is. It's really not that complicated. It's just to understand that God is one and there's nothing else. What can there be? Can there be two things in existence? Can there be God and the world? And if there's the world, then where would God be then? Would he be somewhere else? This Imam Ali says, if you want to know the relationship between God and the world, understand this statement. He says, داخل في الأشياء ليس بالممازجة. He is in all things, but he is not admixed in them. ممازج. خارج عن الأشياء. He's outside of all things. ليس بالمزايلة. But he's not isolated from them. So he's in them, but he's not in them. He's outside of them, but he's not outside of them. And this is the mystery. This is why we have to look at both sides of the contradiction. He and not he, right? Yeah. Arabi talks about this all the time. And this is what it is. So داخل في الأشياء. So the essence is sari في الوجود. The essence flows. It infuses all things. God is in all things, but he's not inside of them physically.
It reminds me of the other hadith, which I think the Prophet ﷺ was instructing Imam Ali, and the Prophet said, "Kan Allah wa lam takun ma'ahu shay'a." And then Imam Ali said, "Al-an kama kan."
Yeah.
Like even after creation, I think this was the idea was Allah was alone, right? And there was nothing but beside him. He created cosmos, he created the makhluk, and he's still in the same, his station hasn't changed, right? He hasn't inherited in the cosmos, he hasn't, it's not like there's some kind of hulul or incarnation or partaking in the cosmos. His station hasn't changed before and after creation.
Right.
So yeah, that great mystery of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's real relationship with the cosmos. So you mentioned tajalli, doctor. If you like, I'm going to go back to the philosophers and the general relationship that the philosophers have between God and the cosmos is one of causality. As Allah as al-illah, and then the cosmos as ma'lul, where Allah is the complete cause, illatu tamma, and the cosmos is basically the ma'lul. And in Ibn Arabi's works, at least from the secondary sources, it seems like Ibn Arabi took great exception to this idea, especially that the philosophers had, and he describes them as ashab al-illah, companions of the causes. And he basically says that they made a mistake in attributing causality, because at the end of the day, when we have causality, when you have the complete cause, the illah, when you have the illah to tamma, ma'lul has to exist according to the philosophers. And therefore, the philosophers tied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands in a way, that he could not have not created, for example, because the makhluk, if they are the ma'lul and Allah is illatu tamma, then the makhluk has to always exist. And Ibn Arabi basically identified that there is some level of dependence, not ontological dependence, but there is still a dependence between illatu tamma and ma'lul, where one cannot exist without the other. So he takes exception to that. And now, obviously, he uses the word tajalli to describe the relationship between God and the cosmos. And tajalli, as you mentioned, exists, in the Quran, Surah Al-Araf, I believe, where Allah talks about what Musa alayhi salam sees. Allah says, "Well, falamma tajalla," on the mountain. So the question is, what is tajalli? If it's not a causal relationship, how do we explain tajalli? Is it an entity and its athar? Is it cause and effect? How do we rationalize it? Or is it simply a mystery that we don't quite understand what tajalli actually means?
I mean, this goes back to the nature of God himself. How does God manifest? What is the nature of manifestation? Tajalli means manifestation. Dhuhur and tajalli. Dhuhur has to do with more the sort of implicit structure of being, the nature of the world, which includes causality. And tajalli is a kind of a more specific word. It can be used to mean dhuhur, but here a lot of times it's used to mean that God shows himself. He shows his identity. He shows his face. He shows himself, so self-disclosure. But dhuhur is just general manifestation. So that's a side point. But in general, this goes back to the nature of being. And the Urafa give the example of the sun and its rays. The rays are simply the sun. But because of the fact that they're distant from the actual physical, body of the sun, we give it a name, we call it rays. And it has different ahkam. So every world has its ahkam. And ahkam means principles and rules governing properties, laws. And so that's why the Urafa, they want to know about wujud, the ahkam of wujud, as well as the ahkam of Allah. They're not always the same. I think I gave this example one time in one of our previous discussions about, say, for example, say you burn your hand on the stove.
Right.
Right. I gave you this example. So you burn your hand on the stove, that's causality. That's ahkam al-wujud. And you say, "Oh, Allah, forgive me, I burned my hand on the stove." It says, "Okay, you're forgiven, but the scar will remain." So God has created laws, and he's created ahkam in each world. And the arif, the Gnostic, or the hakim, doesn't have to be a Sufi arif. Anyone who with insight and intelligence, the intelligent person knows the rules of life. The ahkam, the rules of life and living. You have an understanding of life. And from that understanding of life, you come to know God. You ascend. You understand, say, for example, what's and this is like, you can call it sunnah ilahiyya, sunnah, or you can call it ahkam al-wujud, ma'rifat al-wujud, and so on. So everyone knows that discipline and hard work is something that will bring you success in life. If you work hard, you will succeed. Everyone knows that. And those who haven't figured that out either haven't tasted success or have failed, because this is a hukum. And so once you come to realize this, that in order for me to succeed in this world, materially, socially, intellectually, whatever what have you, in school, in your workplace, you have to work hard. You need discipline. You need organization. then you come to realize that, this is the sunnah ilahiyya. This is what God also wants. And so therefore he made 5 prayers. He made the sun and the moon. He made a schedule, a calendar. He made everything systematic. This is sunnah ilahiyya. So you come to understand the nature of the divine being by looking into the nature of the world. Because it's the same. So this is important to understand how to reach God. It's not only about a mafhum of wujud or for example, praying, excessive prayer or fasting. This is not necessarily what God wants. He wants you to understand life. And prayer and fasting are things that he has set up as as a practice. But this is not the end of this. This is not the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to understand it. And if you've come to understand life, you will come to understand God.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Dr. Mukhtar, so one of the, kind of digging into the relationship between al-Khaliq and Makhluq in the words of Ibn Arabi, when we read at least some of the secondary sources, it seems that, first of all, Ibn Arabi is making the point that we are essentially non-existent, ma'adum in our essence, in the sense that we don't have wujud, and that the entirety of the cosmos, is essentially possibility, that we are always in this state of non-existence and existence, and that Allah has to breathe his nafas ar-Rahman, as he says, to constantly renew creation, right? Creation isn't like something that happened, aeons ago. It is something that is happening at every instance, and that khalq is constantly in this kind of, there has to be something that does this tarjih between this idea of, between non-existence and existence, and it is the nafs ar-Rahman that gives life to us or gives existence to us at every instant. Which seems to indicate that we are at one level non-existent. And one way to internalize is that what we experience is wujud, because we all experience wujud. You and I experience it right now as we speak, as we go through this session, that what we're really experiencing is not our wujud or wujudiyya, it is the nafs ar-Rahman. And that if that nafs ar-Rahman were to be removed, we would no longer experience our wujud. So help us unpack our state of non-existence.
Okay, this is a great question.
That can be experienced, or is it simply Allah doesn't want us to experience it because he's always throwing nafs ar-Rahman at us? How do we internalize the idea that we are essentially non-existent?
Okay, this is a great question, and it's a really, really great topic. Okay, now nafas ar-Rahmani, that's Ibn Arabi term, and coming from the hadith and so on. Okay, let's leave that for a moment. Okay, this is the terminology of Ibn Arabi's Metaphysics. Okay, we can translate some of that terminology to sort of everyday life and our own experience. And I'll have something to say about that in a minute. I'll make a comment on the attachment to certain terminology and trying to translate that terminology for ourselves everyday life and for the 21st century. How are we going to bring that knowledge to today's world? Okay, so that's another topic. Now, our existence is, yes, theoretically, we're non-being, which is in a constant state of transformation. One of the laws of life, Hakim, is always looking for the laws of life. And what is that law? What is that sunnah ilahiyya? What is the law of the universe? Change. Evolution, change, development, transformation. Everything in existence is constantly moving and constantly changing. No 2 days are the same. No 2 seasons are the same. No 2 years are the same. You weren't the same today as you were yesterday, as you were 10 years ago, nor will you be the same in 10 years. You will always be changing, and this is what God wants. He kullu yawmin huwa fi sha'n. Every day he's in a new state of splendor, a new manifestation, a new reality is unfolding. And even within one season, no 2 days are the same. Sometimes you have hot days in the summer, in the winter, and cold days in the summer, and so on. You have, all kinds of things that are happening. They're constantly changing. No 2 moments are the same. So what does that tell us? It tells us that life is transformative. Life is always changing. Time is pushing, is the vehicle through which transformation occurs. And it is said that God is time, right? God is time. It's one of his names. Wahdat. Well, he's the creator of time. He is time, so on. Time is a manifestation of this idea of change. So this is one of the laws of life, is that nothing is permanent. Not even you and I. Even when we die, we will go through stages and states and stations. Even in paradise, there will be new realizations, new realities, new things to discover. It's infinite. So that's one of the laws of life. And it's not and it's not for us to hang on. If an intelligent person will realize the importance of change, and so you'll harness change. If you want to harness life, if you want to renew yourself, go on a trip. Change around the furniture in your home. Change up your routine. This will invigorate you. Similarly, even within spirituality, don't just keep one program. Change it up, change it around. So this is that principle you mentioned, the nafas al-Rahmani, this renewed life. This is a law. This is a hukum.
Yeah, subhanAllah.
In wujud.
Yeah, this is while you were talking and responding, mashallah, I started to, inevitably sort of meditate on this notion of change. And, we all see change all the time, and we see almost nothing but change. Nothing ever stays the same. And we really haven't asked ourselves, or at least I haven't asked myself, why is it the case? Why, you talk about ahkam, why is change permanent? What is the wisdom? And on the one hand, and again, I don't want to throw philosophers under the bus, but the falsafa generally have created sort of this very sort of static, unchanging, basit, absolutely unchangeable Allah, right? And on the other hand, we have this dynamism that we see in the world. And I think Ibn Arabi makes the point that the dynamism we see is a reflection of the infinite possibilities in Allah, which is why, because of the infinite possibilities, no 2 moments are the same.
Mm-hmm.
You will never be the same. You were something different a moment ago, which essentially points to this kind of like infinite level of dynamism, which is so difficult to comprehend in wujud itself, and that wujud is by nature dynamic, and the things that have the lowest level of wujud are the ones that don't change. The rock never changes, or a rock changes over billions of years, right? Because it has a low level of wujud. It doesn't have that same level of dynamism, whereas our qalb is called qalb because it keeps switching, taqallub, right? So it seems like that even within us, we have a center that is very dynamic, and our jism or jasad is something that changes much slower, whereas our spiritual path. So it seems to me that even within ourselves, we can see that there are these realms, that there is a realm that is changing very slowly, and then there's a realm at which there's incredible dynamism almost at every instant, right? Just could you comment on sort of this idea of dynamism and levels of existence?
No, this is an excellent point that you raised. Once you learn the different ahkam of each world, then you can start to interact and harness those worlds. And this is what the arif is doing. He or she is trying to engage appropriately in each world. What is the world of the qalb? The qalb deals with intentions. So to perfect the qalb, you need to perfect intentions. So you bring about sincerity of the self. The perfection of the intellect is in concepts and knowledge and precision of ideas, conceptual. The perception of the ruh is something else, and so on. So each level needs its nourishment, requires its own trajectory to perfect. And one needs to know the level. And that's what the Hakim, the wise person, the sage, the arif is trying to do, is trying to learn how to harness wujud in the most effective way, because this is what God wants. God wants you to live in the most effective, harmonious, fulfilled life possible, to enjoy and to embrace life. Deen is not this abstinence. It's not abstinence. Deen is to embrace life. Part of deen, part of life is abstinence. There is abstinence within it as a way to train the nafs, because the nafs requires abstinence. But the qalb and the ruh require something else, require revelry. It requires embracing life. So abstain on the level of the nafs, don't abstain on the level of the qalb. You love somebody, don't use abstinence in the property of love. Love with your whole entire heart, with your whole entire being. If you're generous, become the definition of generosity, and so on. So these attributes within the qalb, within the ruh, within the self, need to be expressed in their totality. Abstinence and these concepts that we attribute to this rigid form of Islam, it has a very small place. And unfortunately, people think sharia is abstinence. Sharia is laws and regulations, regulatory. It's not. It's a way to polish. It's a method. Sharia is a method. It's a way. So that's one thing. There was something else I wanted to mention. Yeah, anyway,
You mentioned the word polished, Ustad, and that obviously brings up, Ibn Arabi and other Sufis have constantly used that metaphor of the mirror, right? That the image in the mirror isn't real, right? It's a reflection. It's an ayat of the reality of the person who's looking into the mirror, and that our existence, our beings are like mirrors, that we are all mirrors. The cosmos is essentially a mirror, a myriad infinite mirrors that are reflecting the infinite possibilities within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at various levels. And that the art of purification, or the purpose of Sharia, is to help us polish that mirror, right? And it goes back to sort of the first point that you made, right? How do you dress yourself in the akhlaqillah, right? In the takhallaq bi khalqillah, right? Akhlaqillah. So basically, how do we dress ourselves? And the way to do it is to recognize that our mirror can collect dust, rust over time, and that eventually it becomes unable to reflect the tajalli of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like, white cloth can reflect light and black cloth is able to absorb light. Our hearts, which are the center of that dynamism, if it gathers rust, it can stop being being a source of manifestation. Can you just help us unpack that idea of tajalli and the notion that we have the ability to control how much of that tajalli we can manifest, and otherwise we gain, we gather dust, our mirrors become dulled.
Okay. tajalli has a relationship with time. There is a time component to the majla. The majla is the hukum. Now, most people don't know what the majla is and what are the majali. The common person doesn't know. It's difficult to tap into that because it's a level of being which is very close to God. So we see the world, things that are happening in the world, but these are all reflections of the majali. There's a reason for this happening because God is unfolding the world. And so the world is the way it is because this is how God has unfolded it. So that being said, there's a point that I want to make about the study of Ibn al-Arabi and the study of mysticism, or the study of philosophy, Islamic studies in general. One of the problems with studying the past masters is to get stuck in the mindset of the past masters. Now, they were masters of their time. Ibn al-Arabi was the Shaykh al-Akbar of his time, and maybe for many, many generations after him as well. But does that mean that there is not any renewal in the majali? Is there not a divine manifestation for today? Is there not a different disclosure of God in our time? Of course there is. Could Ibn Arabi known about that? Maybe he hinted to it here and there, but maybe not. So, and this is true even with respect to the Prophet. And this is why the Sharia Islamiyya, which is the Islamic legal code, is dynamic. Because when it came down on the qalb of the Prophet, according to the conditions of the Prophet, according to the wujud of the Prophet. So it spoke to the Prophet in his language. But that same Sharia has inbuilt principles that need to be translated for our time. They cannot be applied verbatim. That's a misunderstanding of what Sharia is. Sharia is ahkam al-Wujud, the laws of existence. This is Sharia. But those laws have a time component. And similarly with akhlaq of the Prophet's time is different from the akhlaq of our time. The basic principles are the same, but their application is different. For example, the Prophet's time, there was jihad, waging warfare, the whole idea of the kafir, the kuffar, the munafiqeen, and this really like wartime mentality was the context in which Islam was founded. Can we apply that same mentality in this day and age, in the global village, when your neighbor is a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist? Can you have this mentality of this is a kafir, this is a mushrik, this is this and that? It's impossible, and it's wrong. The Prophet, there was slavery at the time of the Prophet, and they dealt with slaves. Islam didn't abolish slavery. Can you and I, in good conscience, say that the Prophet didn't abolish slavery, therefore slavery is okay? In this day and age, it's impossible to entertain that. Morally impossible. So even morality changes. Even the standards of morality change according to the times. What was okay in one time, say, for example, slavery was acceptable and was not abolished in the time of the Prophet. Now, no one in good conscience in this world could ever say that slavery is okay and acceptable. It's impossible to accept that view, even though Islam didn't abolish it. So it shows that the majla and the ahkam sharia, and also the akhlaq, the ethics of the Prophet, differ. The akhlaq of Isa differs. The akhlaq of Musa differs than the akhlaq that we have today. And this is what it means. This is what majla means. This is what tajalli means. Tajalli is not seeing, the mountain falling before you, like Musa witnessed the tajalli. Tajalli is to understand life, what it is today. What does God want from me today? What are the majali? What are the divine signs I need to be operating with? What are the standards of morality? And of course, Islam provides a framework. The Quran provides the basic rules, a framework. Islam came in a time of extreme patriarchy. They were burying the daughters alive. So Prophet was dealing with this reality. And Arab culture at the time was extremely patriarchal. Can we apply those same cultural values and norms that he lived by? Everybody, including the Prophet, the companions, everybody had multiple wives at the time. 4. He had 9 wives, maybe more. This is the Prophet of Islam. The ultimate man of humanity had 9 plus wives. The companions all had multiple wives. Imam Ali had 4 wives. Hassan had 4 wives. They all had multiple wives. Is this something that we can do and consider to be normal? I'm not saying it's haram or halal. The Quran is explicit in that. But I'm saying there is the cultural sensitivity that we need to embrace today that is in accordance with the times. So morality, sharia, and all of this has to do with the majali. And so Islam is dynamic. Morality is dynamic. But the asl, the original, there's mabadi, or what they call principles of life. And this is what we're trying to discover in this type of discussions.
Thank you, Ustad. In the spirit of sort of exploration, self-exploration, when I was preparing for this this session, interestingly enough, I remembered what I used to think about when I was a child, and inshallah we'll spend another 10 more minutes and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Mm-hmm. As a child, I always had this curiosity, right? I observed, that people were all warm, and I grew up in a very warm part of the world, hot part of the world, actually. And I was like, everyone's hot, everyone's experiencing this heat, but it's all coming from the same source, right? The sun, right? And yet, I cannot embrace your, when you say, hey, I'm feeling hot, or when I say, Mukhtar, I'm feeling hot, you understand it, but you cannot feel my sort of sense of heat. Yet we both acknowledge that it's coming from the same source. The sun is beating down on us. And similarly, when we reflect on our own situation, on our own, let's say, wujud, we recognize that there is something beyond our jism, something beyond our body, and that we have this consciousness, right? This sort of wujdan, or this constant sense of awareness. And this awareness is a great mystery, because on the one hand, if we truly reflect on who we are, whereas I'm a speck of dust on Earth, and the Earth is a speck of dust on our galaxy, and the galaxy is a speck of dust in, the whole observable universe. So you would imagine logically that our wujud would be so dim that it would be completely non-existent. And yet I cannot think of anything but myself. I'm still, sitting and talking to you, and all I can think of is myself. And so this wujud has this incredible quality of always being on. It has this ability for me to ignore everything else around me. And yet the question is the wujud that I'm experiencing the same wujud that you're experiencing, that someone else is experiencing? Yes, we have different bodies. We don't have any issues with that. We have different minds, perhaps. But the wujud, the consciousness that you and I are experiencing, and that people here are experiencing, and the tree and the mountain, is that the same? Is it the same source? And it seems to me that really Wahdat al-Wujud answers that question by saying yes. That wujud that we are somehow temporarily able to experience, that allows us to be the king of this whole universe, that this feeling that we're the lords of, of the castle, that feeling is something coming from the same source, and that our consciousness is driven by the same source, even though the manifestations may be infinite. This was what I used to wonder about when I was a child, and of course I was influenced by Eastern meditation and the Vedanta and things like that. But it seems to me that ultimately that is one way of understanding what Wahdat al-Wujud is that we all experience Wujud from a takhashus perspective. We all understand that you and I are not the same person, and yet perhaps there's an acknowledgement at one level that, hey, Ustad, your consciousness and my consciousness are actually from the same source. Help this baby on and understand what's going on, perhaps.
I mean, if you were to ask me to, how do we sort of negotiate between this concept of wujud and God, Allah? It comes back to this first question that we started with. I would say that there is wujud is if you know the ahkam of wujud, it will help you to understand Allah. Even though from another perspective, yes, wujud and Allah are like, similar terms, and the philosophers use it to refer to God and so on. Forget all that right now. So what are the ahkam of wujud? And what is, and then there's Allah. Allah is something, is a concept that we all have. Fitratan is as a part of our fitrah, our primordial innate nature. We have a sense of this thing, this higher power, which we call God. And this higher power is the ultimate source of all things, the ultimate reality, the ultimate. But in order to get to that place, to find out what is the ultimate, see, what sometimes we often do is we see God as we anthropomorphize God. We look at God as being the source of all principles. Even an atheist, if you ask him, do you believe in justice? He's like, yeah, of course. And you believe in God. You might not believe God as this omniscient being and so on, but God is justice. So you believe in God. The principle of justice, God is justice. God is truth. God is love. The ultimate source of all things. Now, in order for me to get to the place of the ultimate, I need to move through wujud. As my body is moving through wujud, is transforming day by day, in places, having these experiences. I'm moving through wujud to discover that ultimate reality. So I must know the ahkam of wujud in order to reach Allah. This is how I see it. In order for me to get to the Almighty, because if I don't respect wujud, it means I don't respect God. If I don't respect his creation, I don't respect God. If I don't respect the ocean, I don't respect him. I could drown. I have to respect his creation. If I don't respect fire, it could burn me. It could burn my whole house down. If I don't respect wujud, then I'm showing disrespect to God. And this also goes in terms of suluk. For example, if you have a teacher, a sheikh, for example, and we talked about adab before, the teacher says, he who does not have adab with the sheikh can never have adab with God. So you learn adab through the teacher, and you learn adab with through existence. So if you don't have adab with existence in wujud, you'll never have adab with God, because God is wujud. Yeah, so this is the whole point of the whole trajectory, is to understand life and rectify the self, where you become a better version of yourself at every moment. You're improving yourself, increasing yourself in knowledge, improving your akhlaq, improving your adab. And those are the two things. Akhlaq and adab are the ultimate. If you want to know what is the ultimate path and trajectory in life, in a simple sentence, I can tell you that it is akhlaq and adab. It's not philosophy. It's none of that. Through akhlaq and adab, you will reach. And you have ma'rifah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
One last question from my end, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So this is something that I think I have internalized the answer, but it always troubled me that on the one hand, we are told that, and I grew up with this idea that everything is Maya, like we're Maya, there's all the illusion. And, even in this idea of Wahdat al-Wujud, there's this idea that, we really don't possess wujud, right? We have, our sense of wujud is almost illusory in nature. But that never sits well with me, because it almost seems to indicate that the only thing that really we have, which is kind of our wujud, wujudiyya, if you want to call it that, is illusory. And that if it's illusory and unreal, how can it lead us to the real, right? One way of course, internalizing is that it's our rejection of this illusion that leads us to the real. But still, it seems to be that the path would be much easier if we didn't have to deal with this kind of illusion. Sorry, let me mute Brother Muhammad. So given this, I just wanted you to kind of explain the wisdom, the hikmah behind this sense, this illusion, this false notion where we attach ourselves to our wujud, where we attach ourselves to our existence, and we fail to recognize the source of this wujud in the first place.
The source of the human being is the ruh, and the ruh is real. It's not an illusion. Why? Because وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. So God says that I have breathed into man of my spirit. So this nafakh and the ruh is that divine spark. It's the identity of God. This is the mirror. This is why it says, Man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah. He who knows came to know himself. Meaning that when a person returned back to themselves and discovered the ruh, they discovered God. So insan is real, but there are illusory things about life. Life is real, right? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Batil means illusory. The Quran says God did not create this in illusion and batil. He created it in haqq. This world is haqq. This life is truth. This test is real. So yes, there are illusory things about this life, but there are real things about behind this illusion is a reality. Haqiqah. There are haqa'iq. So this life is real. And this is the thing that is the hardest thing to grasp. As soon as you understand the reality of things, everything will change. As soon as you understand the reality of this passing life, of the illusory life that you're living, once you grasp its reality, the fact that it's an illusion is the reality.
Right.
So once a person grasps that, it motivates them to action. He says, oh my God, this is it. This is my only life that I have. I live every day in negligence, in ghafla. I should be doing so much more in my life. I could be doing so much more. And everybody will feel that way. how much time we've wasted in life, and so on. And you'll come to realize that all of it was real. The test was real. That God, the things that God said to you and he showed you, and the signs that he sent you, that we said, this is not real. It's real. But if you had faith, look at what Prophet Isa says. He says, if you had faith, you would be able to move this mountain. You can move a mountain with your faith. But how little faith that we have. How much more we could be doing if we believed in the reality of things, in the reality of our words that we speak. You say something to someone, and you don't realize how much effect it has. One word can change a person's life around, for better or for worse. So anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, there is an illusion which is a part of life, but the illusion itself is a reality. That God placed an illusion and a veil. And in order to find out what is truly real, we must remove the veils which are real.
Right. He gave us the veil and the hand with which we can remove the veils.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It reminds me of the famous hadith, An-nasu niyamun fa idha matu intabahu, right? Basically,
right.
we're all in this kind of dream state. And when we die, we wake up. And of course, the Quran attests to that, right? Like the Mukashafa. On this day, you'll see clearly. But on that same day of judgment, all the constructs that we have, the mental etabari constructs we have about relationships and wealth and all of that, those become unreal. That the day of judgment exposes the illusory nature of those assumptions and those relationships. So thank you so much for being patient with my questions, Ustad.
Can I just say one thing about that hadith? إِذَا مَاتُوا إِنْتَبَهُ, when they die, they wake up. It's not only referring to the day of the physical death. Even if a person who dies, maut iradi, as they say, right? So this is when a person dies the death of the lower self, and they have a rebirth in this life. And this is what is desired. This is what we need to have. We need to have a rebirth in this life, to be born again, as Isa would say. None of you shall reach the malakut, the kingdom of heaven, until he is born twice. His companion Nicodemus says, oh master, meaning Isa, oh Isa, how can a man be born twice from the mother's womb? And then Isa says, a person is not born physically, but he's born of spirit a second time. Here, let me read that hadith to you. It's the famous one, where he says, one minute, and I'll send that to you.
Yeah, it's reflective of the directive, mutu qabla an tamutu, right? Like,
exactly, mutu qabla an tamutu, as the Prophet said. And he says, so none can ascend to the heavens unless he has been born twice, said Isa. Nicodemus asked, how can someone be born when they are old? He says, surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb. Jesus says, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying you must be born again. So the second birth is not physical, but it is luminous. And when there's a luminous birth, that's when people wake up and they realize the reality of things. And this is ma'rifah. This is what the mystics are aspiring to achieve, at the very least, to have that kind of inward awakening.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So with that, I'll just quickly go through the chats and see if there's any questions that we haven't covered already. Tanbir asked, Mansoor al-Hallaj's notion of an al-haq. I think we touched upon that. Muhammad asks, it would be nice if Dr. Explains Wahdat al-Wujud and compares it to other theological positions like Ash'ari, the Ash'ari Aqidah. Generally speaking, Dr. Mukhtar, obviously Wahdat al-Wujud is, and I'll just generalize this question, Wahdat al-Wujud is a specific take on our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using the idea that there's one wujud. Different schools have had different opinions. Could you just give us like a very brief rundown of how does Wahdat al-Wujud sit with, you know, Ash'ari or Maturidi or Mu'tazili or, you know, the let's say Shi'i? How does it fit? Does it fit? Does it not fit? Is there tension?
Okay, before we take this, let's go back to this Mansur al-Hallaj question. Just really briefly. Now,
100%.
Yeah. And this is great because Hallaj was a great arif. And here he's having a hal, a state, when he says ana al-haq. So here, this is you can say it's a maqam al-fana. He's fani. He's in the state of annihilation. And so when a person is in that state, he may utter something where he's identifying, he says that, you know, I am one. And this is something that even Prophet Isa says, right? He says in the Bible, I and the Father are one. How is that any different from Hallaj saying Ana al-Haq? Or he who has seen me has seen the Father, Jesus says in the Bible. And we have statements like this from Isa, from the prophets, and so on, where they're identifying being one with God. So this is a state of fana. And as you can say, it's fana, or it's one of the stations, one of the states. Ana al-Haq. In other words, that insan, and according to Ibn al-Arabi terminology, the insan al-kamil, the perfect human is one who becomes the manifestation of God, where God thereby becomes his hearing, his seeing, according to the hadith of Nawafid, which is found in Bukhari and in the standard sources of hadith. God says, I am his hearing and his seeing. Right? He says, through me he listens, sees, speaks, strikes, and walks. And this is in Bukhari.
Yep. Also
in the Shia collections as well. So here, Hallaj is not saying anything against the discourse of the hadith. Allah is saying that he speaks through me. I'm the one who's speaking. So maybe it's here Allah saying, Ana al-Haq. God is speaking through him. Or that Hallaj is saying that I and the Father are one. This is Wahdat al-Wujud in the perfect way of expressing it. But the problem is that when these schools of theology, now going back to the second issue of, you know, the different schools, I don't want to look at each of them of the schools individually, but in general, Muslim theology had a problem with the issue of anthropomorphism. This is a big point of contention. And this is why Islam rejected Christian notions of the Trinity. Because how can God have a son? And of course, the Quran rejects this, having a physical son, but it doesn't mean that these ideas that God having a hand and a foot, being a father, having a son, and in the metaphorical sense are rejected by Islam. No. An-nas al-khalq iyad Allah. All the creation are God's family. God says he has a hand, he has a face. And he says, what has prevented you? This is in the Quran. When Allah addresses Iblis, he says, what has prevented you from prostrating before that which I've created with my own two hands?
Yeah.
So he's referring to hands and the wajh Allah and the foot of God. No person gives to the beggar or to the asker, and it goes into the hand of God before it reaches the hand of the person asking.
Or the Jews, you know, I think the Quran says Yadullah maghlulatan, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That they used to make the claim that, or the Hudaybiyah, where Allah says Yadullahi fawqa aydihim, right, where Allah talks about how He is pleased with the companions for sort of pledging allegiance to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam.
Exactly.
There is another comment actually from Tanbir as well, where at least among the Naqshbandis and Mujaddid al-Thani or Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi, who as he's known, Mujaddid, he wanted to clarify some of the misconceptions that had crept into Wahdat al-Wujud, where it became sort of pantheistic or panentheistic, etc., where people started equating Allah with the cosmos. And Mujaddid al-Thani came up with this idea of Wahdat al-Shuhud or Wahdat al-Shuhud, where he was saying that these halat or these shatahat, as Mansur al-Halaj proclaimed, were certain stations in your wayfaring, in your suluk, where you become so intoxicated with this awareness of Allah that you completely forget your own being, and you can see nothing but God, right? And in that state, it seems to you that ana al-haq. But Mujaddid al-Thani or Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi did not reject Wahdat al-Wujud. Rather, he seemed to indicate that Wahdat al-Wujud was a station in wayfaring, and that that it shouldn't be confused with, it's not a state that we can permanently be in, because it's not, in the sense of, if it's popular misunderstanding, right? That he was saying, like, it isn't true that Allah is with the cosmos, except that in a certain state of your wayfaring, you become so intoxicated and so aware of Allah that you become so completely unaware of yourself. And of course, the Naqshbandis, he was a mujaddid in the Naqshbandi tradition. I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi.
I mean, there are two different branches of philosophy. One is here Wahdat al-Wujud is speaking of ontology. It's the metaphysics of being. What is it? And Wahdat al-Shuhud is epistemology. He's talking about the perspective of man and his relation to this wujud. So this is epistemology. So those are two different branches, and they are, yes, it's fine. Wahdat al-Shuhud is from the perspective of insan. Wahdat al-Wujud is a general cosmological framework. It's looking at what is it? Can we posit more than one existence, or is it only one thing in existence? And yes, there is Wahdat al-Shuhud within that. So it's fine. I mean, it doesn't contradict the perspective of Wahdat al-Wujud. Just different way of looking at it.
Got it. There's a question or comment from Razan about slavery. I think Dr. Ustad was basically talking about the principle, the ahkam behind the sharia, right? As that, yes, the freeing of the faku rakaba is something that is very rewarded action to emancipate slaves, and this is what, of course, many of the companions also did, along with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They freed a lot of slaves. So yes, the Quran has the ishara that slavery is something that is, is not as good, but perhaps it was the most meaningful and logical system in place at that time, given the conditions of that time. But it no longer makes sense for us to own slaves, etc. I think that was the point that Ustad was making. I just wanted to open up perhaps to people on the call who have been patiently listening. If you have any questions, just raise your hands. You can go to the reaction button and just raise your hand. Please raise your hand, and then you can unmute yourself once I call your name, and you can ask your questions, inshallah, if you have any direct questions. Lily, assalamu alaikum. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. And my question relates to what you were saying about change and the laws. So we have this change and dynamism. At the same time, you were referring to principles of life, which are not maybe similar to what we understand as rules, as static rules and laws. And here I was wondering if these principles that we have to preserve are actually there to lead us back to reality and the source of life at any time we live in. So disregarding the time and the differences in morality that you mentioned, we still need this connection to reality. And these principles, as I understand it, are there to, the methods that you mentioned are there to always lead us back to this reality, otherwise we will lose this connection and we are lost. Thank you.
Yes. So these principles ultimately go back to the divine names. The principle of justice and truth and love and mercy and so on, generosity. All of these are the divine principles, the divine attributes. And those are the ultimate principles of life. Now, how do we access that, and how do we live according to those rules and those essential principles of life? Well, first of all, the human being has an intrinsic moral compass, which is called the fitrah. And this fitrah, which is essential human nature, which God says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ. So the deen, which is the upright, their true religion, which is Deenul Qayyim, is the fitrah, innate human nature, which God has created upon this principle of the divine. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And we taught Adam, meaning mankind, all of the divine names, the names. So mankind within himself and every human being has the divine template. And this is what is known as fitrah. Now, in order to excavate fitrah, there's a couple things that we need. We need knowledge, and we need to pursue the path of wisdom. When you start to study, anybody starts to study expressions of wisdom, the wisdom of the ancient, of all traditions, not just Islamic wisdom, the wisdom of the Greek tradition, of the Indian tradition, the Chinese tradition, every tradition in the world, there are people who spoke wisdom. That wisdom is perennial. That wisdom is eternal. And from those principles of wisdom, you can learn how to live life, how to engage with life, because those are eternal principles. Ultimately, no matter how much life changes, and no matter how much outwardly it changes, fundamentally life is the same. Fundamentally, we still have the same dreams and aspirations. We all have the same fears as the people did in the past, and the same dreams and hopes. So the human being fundamentally is the same. Outwardly, it's changed. The application changes through time. But at the same time, we must know what is the divine relationship that you have today. It's not the same relationship that the people had in the past. Otherwise, God would not have sent 124,000 prophets. It shows that there was always renewal and change and evolution in the human being, in culture and society. So there always needed to be a new message, a new color. It's the sunnah. Life is changeable. So we also have to know what does God desire from us at any given moment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and I'll call out your name and you can unmute. I had one question actually that came through before we had this meeting, Ustad, which was from Brother Adil. So Adil had a question about, if Wujud is one, and if our Wujud is, or Wujudiyya is this sort of reflection and tajalli of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what is the nature of kufr? What is the sin of the kafir in general? Where does this originate, perhaps? And maybe you can just kind of throw light on the question of, like, what is the fundamental crime of kufr? and the idea of disbelief?
So when God created the world, he created all these different possibilities. He created the possibility of crime, of murder, of disobedience. And in the first instance, we see that Iblis had the choice to disobey. God had given insan, Adam, and his progeny free will. And this was part of the divine plan. So yes, when we think of wujud as a single monolithic thing, we can't see it. We have to also factor in free will as one of God's creations. Knowledge as God's creation. Ignorance, as we have a hadith in some of the Shia literature in Al-Kafi, that when God created the aql, Junud al-aql, jahl, if you remember this, or you can look this hadith up. It's a discussion that someone asked Jafar as-Sadiq, and he said that the first thing that God created was the intellect. And opposed to the intellect or intelligence, he also created jahl, ignorance. And he gave intelligence 75 soldiers. And when ignorance looked at intelligence, it felt jealous. And it asked God to give it an equal amount of soldiers, an army. And so this whole discussion is called Junud al-Aql wal-Jahl, the armies of intelligence and ignorance. So ultimately, life is about this. It is about the victory of the power of intelligence, because intelligence is the fundamental principle in man. Now, I don't mean aql falsafi, I don't mean the philosophical intellect. The intelligence relates to the fundamental identity of a human being. What it means to be human is to be intelligent. And I don't mean knowing physics or knowing mathematics or so on. Intelligence has a moral component. And the vizier of intelligence is khair, is goodness. It's not ilm, it's goodness. And the vizier of jahl is shar, is evil. So all evil emanates from ignorance, and all good comes from intelligence. So as long as the human being is developing their intelligence for khair, this is real intelligence, that good things will come out of that person. And then he says at the end of this statement, he says, al-aqlu ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman wa iktusiba bihi al-Janan. The intellect is that by which God is worshipped and paradise earned. It is from intelligence that God is worshipped. God loves the intelligent. And then in the same hadith it says, God looked at intelligence and says, I have not created anything better and loftier and more obedient and so on than this creature that I've created, meaning intelligence, aql. And this is not the aql al-awwal of the philosophers. This is the aql in the riwayah, in the hadith. Aql is the qalb, aql is the ruh in this context. It's not the aql of the philosophers. So it's a different notion of aql. Sometimes the hadith will talk about aql, intellect. Sometimes it talks about qalb. It's the same. Qalb and aql is the same. Just different aspects of it. Qalb when it fluctuates between the dunya and the akhirah. Aql when it recognizes, perceives, understands, so on. Ruh is when there's spirit, there's life, there's animation, activity. There's life in the human being. You could have aql, but your ruh is weak. And so you're slothful. The power of the ruh is weak, and so on. But it's all one thing.
Ustad, I
And it
had a
goes back
question.
to yes, yeah.
You had you made a comment, and we've gone through sort of the philosophers versus irfani. One of the common, I would say, allegations, and I don't find it to be a faithful allegation, is the idea that Ibn Arabi was a Neoplatonist, and that he borrowed from the Neoplatonists. But when I read, at least from the secondary sources about Ibn Arabi, it seems like he was not a Neoplatonist, and that he rejected some of the sort of fundamental ideas of the Neoplatonists, like the Qaidatul Wahid, and the idea that La yastur an wahid illa al-wahid, and he was of the idea that this would reject the Quran, where Allah has a direct relationship with all of his makhluqat, if you may, and that his idea of the tajalli was not the emanationist, the sudur of the Neoplatonist. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are regarding the ideas of the school of Ibn Arabi, the Akbarian school, and sort of the Neoplatonic or Neoplatonic or Neoplatonist falsafa system.
I mean, look, there may be some borrowing, there may not be some borrowing, there may be some commonalities with a lot of these philosophies. If you look at Taoist philosophy, Taoism is so close to the school of Ibn Arabi. It's amazing. It's the similarities are remarkable, and it's not because they borrowed from each other, but there were urafa who came to the similar conclusions. An arif sees wujud, recognizes al-haq and haqiqa, and whether it happened in ancient China or it happened in Arabia or what have you, they are both discovering the same thing. Say somebody discovers, and this happens actually, that two people discovered the same thing at the same time at two different parts of the world. So how do you explain that? The same time, and it's happened a lot in history. There was like simultaneous discoveries of the same phenomenon in two different parts of the world, and there's no way they could have communicated and talked to one another. So similarly, in irfan is the same. It's just haqiqa. Anyone who discovers wujud, whether it happens at the same time, at the same place, it doesn't mean that they borrowed from each other. They're just seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
They're discovering the same reality. So yeah, I mean, there were urafa. The Greeks were urafa. Aristotle was an arif. Plato was an arif. Socrates was an arif and a hakim. There were hukama and urafa. An arif is a knower. Hakim is a sage, slightly different. But they are, dealing with the higher realities and higher aspects of life.
Makes sense.
Hikmah is the ultimate.
Yep. Allah says, whoever has been given hikmah has been given something fantastic or amazing.
A great good, yeah. Khairun kathir.
Khairun kathir, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd like to open it up for more questions, inshallah. Just if you have a question, click on the reactions button, raise your hand, and then inshallah, we have time for a couple of more questions, I think. Otherwise, Ustad has to put up with my questions, which you don't want.
We can take something from the chat as well. Lily, give us 1 minute. We'll just take some of these.
Oh, yeah.
We experience the stage of Wahdat al-Wujud. Let's see. So yes, look, this question: Allah created light and darkness. Can we say that kufr is part of darkness? Yes, correct. Is darkness. Dhulma. Allahu nuru samawati. So everything holy and divine is light, is attributed to light. But Allah created, so remember, again, we go back to this same principle that try to see that there is God Almighty, the sacred being, the absolute, and then there is wujud, there's existence, the thing that he has created, or the manifestation of his being. And so this is why this is how we solve the problem of evil. Because if this Wahdat al-Wujud, then everything should be good. So how do we accommodate evil in this Wahdat al-Wujud, which is all God? So we're not saying that. We're not saying Wujud is equivalent to God in all of its aspects. We're saying that Wujud is a manifestation, that there's only one thing in existence, which is Allah and his manifestations. So Allah, at the level of the essence, was unknowable. At the level of the asma is perfect, the perfections of the asma, and so on. But as wujud descends in the enclosures of contingency, then we can talk about the problem of evil, the origin of multiplicity, of sin, of kufr, of darkness, of ignorance, and so on. And all of these negative qualities which we cannot apply to Allah, but we can apply to his creation. And from one perspective, it's all one thing. But from another perspective, it's God and his being, God and his manifestations. So this is how we can solve the problem of evil. Otherwise, we'd run into this philosophical problem. The Wahdat al-Wujud is pantheistic. Wahdat al-Wujud saying, oh, Allah is, you see evil, you see murder, you see crime and kufr, and so it's all one thing. No, we're not saying that. And Ibn Arabi is not saying that. It's a misunderstanding of Wahdat al-Wujud. It's wujud wa dhuhuratihi, his manifestations. And part of that manifestation is his creation. And remember that there is pre-creation and then there's creation. God says, أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْأَقْلِ, for example, as one of the hadith might indicate. But there is an أول الخلق. There's khilqa. So khalq, and then there's pre-creation. So the asma are not created. There are certain things which are not created, the uncreated. And there are things which are created. So they descend and they become created. So in any case, when we talk about light and darkness, we talk about, yes.
I just wanted to add a couple of other things as well to that point where, I think the Quran says, Ja al-haq, zahaq al-batil, innal batila kana zahuqa, right? Like the idea is that batil, falsehood, it simply has no power when truth shines on it. When you shine light, darkness disappears, whereas darkness cannot neutralize light. And the other explanation I've heard both within some of the secondary sources on Ibn Arabi and others is the idea that creation is by definition an expression of all of the infinite possibilities within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore there are some possibilities that are farther from him in terms of their ability to reflect his nature. And that relatively speaking, they appear to us as relative darkness, right? There is no absolute darkness. There can be no absolute non-existence per se, but relatively speaking, we see them as non-existence or evil or darkness. But darkness will disappear the moment you shine light on it, and that Allah has given through our wujudiyya the ability to shine light on this batil. I mean, just some of my personal observations.
Right, and there is, so by investigating the principle of Wahdat al-Wujud, we learn how to deal with the problem of evil. Number one, the origin of evil. It helps us to solve the origin of multiplicity. How do things come to be? Because we have these terms of tajalli and dhuhur, manifestation, and so on. So we're all using that in the framework of this theory of Wahdat al-Wujud. And thirdly, we come to realize that there are ahkam al-wujud and ahkam Allah. There are things which apply to wujud that don't apply to God, even though it's all one thing. So sometimes we can apply a sort of a morality to life and the way the world works, and sometimes we don't. So for example, there's a certain morality that we apply to the human world. Killing, is unacceptable in the human world, but in the animal world, in the animal kingdom, this is survival. This is what they do. So there's a different standard. We don't have the same moral code. They don't have morality as we do. They have instinct. So similarly, the human world has its set of moral code. And that's why we can't conflate morality, which exists in the human world, and apply that to wujud in general. How do we account for the existence of evil or tsunamis or murder or oppression, famine, all of these things? How do we account for that if God is ultimately good? And these are all like major philosophical, theological problems, which we can probably look into another time. But this is the way through. This is the way forward, is to understand the difference between Allah, God, and his sacred essence, and his wujud, knowing that it's all one, and at the same time there are things which apply to wujud that don't apply to his being. So try to negotiate these things, these ideas, in order to solve these major theological problems.
I think we have time for one more question, inshallah, from people who have been listening in. Just raise your hands if you have any final questions. Okay, inshallah, we've recorded this session, so I'm sure there will be other questions, and perhaps we can have a follow-up. But I wanted to first of all just thank you, Ustad Dr. Ali, that this is obviously a very complicated topic, and it's a topic that often is misunderstood, mainly because people either don't want to engage with it, or they come with preconceived notions, or out of good faith and good intention that they don't want us to descend into hulul and things like that, right? Like we don't, Islam wants to maintain the sanctity of divinity, and so we, out of good intention. Regardless, there has been, there's a lot of polemics about this topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to first of all touch upon this topic. It's amazing. I YouTubed Wahdat al-Wujud, and there are almost no discussions on Wahdat al-Wujud on YouTube. It's quite amazing. Certainly no discussion where somebody is able to sit down and unpack this to the extent that you have. So we are grateful for that, and we're grateful that you didn't shy away from it, because a lot of I think there's a reason why people don't talk about Wahdat al-Wujud, because it's a complicated topic and it's a sensitive topic. So we really appreciate it. May Allah reward you for your efforts, and it has been incredibly rewarding to sit down with you again and have this session. Inshallah, we'll find other topics. I know that there are a couple of other topics that came up in the course of our sessions that people have been asking about. And, theodicy is something that you just mentioned, the idea of suffering and theodicy. How do we contend with the idea of evil, suffering? Inshallah, we can have that's a topic that's come up, but we will have more reasons and excuses to partake of your time and your knowledge, but really appreciate your time and efforts again, Doctor. I don't know if you had any final comments about this topic of Wahdat al-Wujud that you want us to leave us with, and then we'll close.
I mean, all I can say as a final comment, as a closing statement, is that when we say this topic of Wahdat al-Wujud, if wujud has a unity, then knowledge also is a reflection of that. So if that being the case, my only advice going forward in this discussion and others, for example, is to have a kind of a unified perspective on the pursuit of knowledge. When we study Ibn Arabi, or study the Sufis, or study the theologians, or the Greeks, or the other schools of thought, Christianity, and so on, look at it from an objective perspective and try to extrapolate the truths within each discipline and each system. And it's like wahdat al-ilm, right? As Imam Ali says, al-ilmu nuqtatun. Knowledge is a dot. قد كثره الجاهلون, like the ignorant have made it multiple. So we've made it into multiple subjects and multiple disciplines, and this school of thought and the Sufis and the theologians and the philosophers say this, they're all saying similar things, and you can get something from everyone. So moving forward, just like we have Wahdat al-Wujud, there's Wahdat al-Ilm. There's a unifying reality of knowledge that no one claims or possesses a monopoly on knowledge, not even Islam. So I suggest that learn from every school, every doctrine with an open mind. Don't worry if they're Sufi or Sunni or Shia or Ismaili or Yahudi or Jewish or Christian. Just because you don't necessarily follow that faith or ascribe to that system or that culture or to those people, it doesn't make a difference. You're here to seek knowledge, right? We're here. All of us are here to seek knowledge and to discover truth and reality. So just as a final point, Wahdat al-Wujud percolates into different areas, and one of them is the aspect of seeking knowledge and to understand reality. So that's it. And inshallah, thank you, Brother Anand, for setting up these sessions and really solidly engaging with the material. It really makes everyone think, and you're so well prepared with the questions and the line of thinking that it's really a credit to you. So appreciate you for your efforts setting this up, and for everybody to attend it patiently, and inshallah, hopefully, by Allah's permission, we can do it again.
Yeah, I will post this video on YouTube, and I'd love for more people to watch this, because like I said, this is not a topic that there are any resources at all. So appreciate your comments, feedback. And again, thank you so much, Doctor, for spending time with us.
My pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you, everybody. And inshallah, we will see everyone next time.
Salam, everybody.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Bye-bye, everyone.